Welcome back. Now, the final lap is about a family tragedy during her teenage years that saw a highly talented track runner, Abby Dennison, become world #1 over 1,500 meters after an ambitious meeting with a director in London who arranges race in the London Olympic Stadium with the goal of breaking the world record. Abby and the other top-ranked athletes are invited to compete, and she has to prepare for the biggest race of her life. The goal is winning and breaking the record. This is what happens in the real world of elite track athletics, where sporting brilliance is no guarantee of success, where races are run on a knife edge and a duck underbelly exists along fame, fortune, accolades and records. Well, before we give it all away, we've invited author, sports journalist and commentator Ian Laxton to tell us more about his latest offering. Ian, a very good morning to you. A warm welcome to Morning Live. I mean, first of all, let's start with the final lap. What is the story about? We gave away a little bit about it, but what is the inspiration behind the final lap?
Well, thank you, Leba. Thanks for your time. I have to say that, as a commentator, my life was very much involved in international track athletics. And when I retired 3.5 years ago down to Somerset West, I decided I needed to do something more. And I decided to write a novel. Now, that little introduction you read is a little bit of the background to the story. But remember, it's a novel. A lot of people have asked me, is this some sort of a biography or something that's real? And it's not. It's a story. But I think it's quite a good story, and really it was inspired by the desire to write stories about track and not just sort of talk about it. And this is a kind of a retirement project. So it's really been a 3-year journey, mainly through lockdown, but I'm very proud of the results. And I think the response I've had so far to people that have read it has been very positive. It's been a great project. And of course, it's going to go into the bookstores now around the country one of these days, hopefully.
Give us a brief synopsis of who Abby is in the context of athletics and how she ends up in the situation that she does.
Okay, firstly, it's a South African story. Abby Dennison, my lead character, is a South African woman who was born in Johannesburg. And when you start the book, you'll find that something terrible happens to her when she's still at school. And it changes her whole worldview. She's a very talented runner. And what happens is she decides to kind of really make something out of running. And she ends up as one of these iconic, once-in-a-generation athletes. And you find them in sport, you find them in music, you find them in art, but you find them all over these places. These sort of people that once in every 20 years, there's somebody that good. And she really is a wonderful athlete. She's got a very good support system. And she's motivated by this childhood tragedy to become #1 in the world. And she becomes ranked #1 in the world at the age of about 25. And that's where the story starts. And what happens in the story is that, in fact, in real life, the world mile record for women is relatively slow compared with, for example, the 1,500 meters. If you go and look at the records, you'll see that. And a meeting director in London wants to set up an attempt on the women's world record in the London Olympic Stadium. And that's really where the story starts. And it's all about how she prepares for this, how the race happens, how it rolls out, and more importantly, what happens afterwards, because that's by far not the end of the story. And her life changes and all sorts of things happen to her. And it's a good story, but it's based on reality. That's how track athletics really works. That's if you read my book and you listen and you go and watch the Olympics or international track, that's what happens in the real life. So that's a bit of the background.
Yeah. And how would you summarize, the plot without giving away obviously too much? Does it refer in any way to Roger Bannister's world mile record in, 1954?
It certainly does, because, that was arguably the most famous track race in history, the world mile record. Everybody knows Bannister and his 3:59.4 minutes. So, 3 minutes 59, sorry, I beg your pardon. And what this meeting director in London wants to do, he wants to kind of emulate that. He wants to try and get it back again, that kind of excitement around a mile race. And he does it very successfully. But so there's a bit of reality, there's quite a lot of reality built into the story. In other words, the Bannister race is real, the times are real, the way the races are run are real, but the characters and the actual events are not real. But it's built around, and in fact, the race is called the Ronja Bannister Memorial Mile. That's what it's called.
What are the themes that you explore in this book, and why are they worth exploring and unpacking?
Good question. Very interestingly, I think what the book shows is the kind of the lifestyle of an international individual sports person. In other words, if you're in a rugby team or a soccer team, it's a team thing. But if you're a tennis player, a golfer, or a runner, it's very much an individual thing. And you have a little small group of people around you. You travel around the world. You're on your own. Your lifestyle is very unsettled. And if you're a woman, particularly, I think you'll see in the story that particularly famous women, be they athletes, be they musicians, be they rock stars, be they movie stars, they live in a certain risky environment in terms of iconic women are the targets of all sorts of things out there. And the story goes into that, and it's a little bit scary at times because Abby has to run the gauntlet of those risks. Plus, of course, in athletics, there's the whole doping risk, which is absolutely massive. So all those elements are in the story.
And, you know, tragedy as well is what also drives her as well to, you know, push forward. How does she use that to her advantage, Abby, that is?
It's a mental shift. You know, I think when you're young, and she was 15 or so when this thing happened, you can kind of drift on and put it behind you and say, pretend it wasn't there, or have all sorts of counseling and kind of in a way forget about it. But, you know, what she does is takes it and says, listen, I'm going to make something of my life because this has happened to me and nobody's going to beat me now. And it's a mental shift that she makes, and it's pivotal in the story to the way she reinvents herself as she grows up.
And does she finally understand that is winning enough?
Well, that's the payoff line in this thing. And I think she has to ask herself at the end of the day, does it really matter? I mean, it does matter, obviously, but things like world records and lots of money and lots of fame and all the stuff that goes with it. And I mean, we all know that from sports people and rock stars and musicians and people. But at the end of the day, she's going to say, is that really I want out of life? Because you balance in life the risk and the reward. And the rewards are great, but so are the risks. And you become very unidimensional. You become an athlete, and that's all you do. You go travel around the world and run track races. And she has to decide whether that's all she wants in life.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is your first novel. From a personal perspective, what does this mean to you personally? And what lessons came with embarking on this particular project? I mean, having commentator over the two oceans and so many, this is a different ballgame altogether.
Absolutely. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. But again, when you retire from all these things, you have to kind of reinvent yourself, a little bit like Abby did. And it was a massive project. Writing fiction is hard because you've got to invent everything. And there are two phases to it, and I'll be very brief about this. The first is writing it. And I had a wonderful support team. I had a great publisher, Tom Cottrell, and a wonderful editor called Russell Clark, who was just superbly supportive and fixed me up and put me on the path. And we got it written and produced, and it's now in print, and it looks brilliant, I think. But then you've got to market the thing, and that's the hard part. Now you've got to get people to put it in bookstores, you've got to have book launches, you've got to talk to people on television stations. So that's the second half. So it was a great journey for me. You know, when you're over 70, you still got to start learning. Yeah.
And I have no doubt that you can market this book well. Thank you so much for talking to us. Congratulations again on the book. Author, sports journalist and commentator Ian Laxton talking to us about his first baby. It's his first novel. It's titled The Final Lap. And he was talking to us about that.